So we got no regulation. We got risky loans, right? Do we get this?
No.
And so the whole thing is going to be built on debt. Debt on top of debt on top of debt. And in a capitalist economy, businesses cannot function without debt. They cannot function. They have to be able to borrow money because there'll be times of the year where they don't have money. The best example will be farmers. Farmers of the business of farming, you have money basically once a year. So you need to have the availability of credit. And so there's always going to be debt. But here, we're going to have debt fueled by banks making more money and risky loans, but by speculation. You have a chance to get rich very quick. But since there are no rules or regulation on banks or where they got the money, not only are they going to be making incredibly risky loans, but they're going to be borrowing money, banks themselves, borrowing money, then loaning that money out. Or investment banks borrowing that money and literally speculating with that money. And using as their collateral, the banks were to borrow that money, the deposits of their small depositors. They're taking deposit money and using that to speculate, or using that to fund speculation. By the way, the banks that fund speculation are investment banks. The banks down the street that do your home loan or car loan, or you put your savings account in, that's a commercial bank. And they're one and the same. So you get a situation where Bank A is loaning all this money out, and to get it, they'll borrow from Bank B, who will borrow from Bank C, who will borrow from Bank D, and they're all collecting fees on this. Who will borrow from Bank D, who will borrow from Bank E, who will borrow from Bank A. Yes, interlocking debt. And that's what's going to happen here. All it takes is one, and the whole thing will fall apart. All of this interlocking debt, debt on top of debt. Nobody knows who's loaning money to what. Nobody knows what anything is worth. Banks are taking the IOUs from their debtors. They're taking those and selling them to other people. That is exactly what's happening now. That little piece of paper that banks get, trust me, when you get a loan, you sign so many pieces of paper, it's kind of mind-boggling. Wait till you get a mortgage for a house. It's crazy how many documents you sign. All your debt and debt obligations, what will happen to you. But they'll take that debt, and to them, is that an asset? Forget it. That's an asset. They can take that little piece of paper that you signed. Let's say you sign this, I owe $1 million, and they can sell it. They use that as collateral. They can chop it up into little bits and split it up into a bunch of different new things called bonds and sell those, which is exactly what they do. They call it mortgage-backed securities today. All your home loans, when I used to have a home, well, let's see, yeah, I used to have a home loan. They were chopped up in little bits and sold. And then those were chopped up in bits and sold. And they were chopped up in little bits and sold. All these little instruments to try to speculate. Now, why am I telling you this? First off, you're probably looking at me, most of them are going, what the heck is he talking about? And I have no idea what he's talking about, which, by the way, do a lot of you have no really idea what I'm talking about? That's the idea. If you don't know, how can you regulate or control it? All that money's flowing all over. Here's what I'm telling you. Let's say the housing market crashes, where people can't pay their debts and anything. How do we know what anything is worth? Because what I just said there? How do we know? You don't, and the whole thing collapses. That's what happened in 1929, and that's what happened in 2008. The whole thing collapsed. So, nobody knows what. So this is the debt to GDP. So this is the ratio of the amount of debt that, this is non-corporate or household debt. They used to figure out different ways, but this is just the debt that households have. Not business debt, just households. So individual people, commercial debt, and it was the size of the economy. When the Great Depression hit, remember all the debt and installment plans, and then crashed. Now here, this was conscious policy by the U.S. government to try to limit that debt, to limit speculation. Well, no, you can see where they got rid of those regulations, can't you? And that's 2008 crash. So you can almost always tell when a crash is coming by household debt. Where are we at now? No? Yeah. So I don't know if a crash is going to happen. It doesn't mean it will, but debt is a big indicator. So what this is going to trigger is a bank panic. All of a sudden, people start looking at these banks going under, and people think, oh no, my money is in trouble. I better get there first, because they know that the banks, everyone knows this, the banks can't cover all their deposits. And they saw this in the 1920s. You see this right here? We're going to look at this real quick. Everyone see this right here? These are all the bank failures because of the farm failures of the 1920s. All these local banks. So everybody knew. So here's rushing to City National Bank in New York City. City National Bank was surviving, but everybody's thinking, well, if that bank down the street lost their money, I better go to my bank. So even healthy banks will fail. And banks that survive are afraid to loan money now. During a boom, everyone's loaning like mad. Collateral, heck, I trust everything you have is worth money. You have a stock, it's worth money. You have a bond, it's worth money. In bad times, nobody will loan, nobody trusts anything. And it's literally called the credit freeze. Just everyone's afraid to loan. And when they do, it's higher interest rates and it's very restricted. So it goes from banks are easy credit to they're afraid of everything. Nobody knows what anybody's assets are worth anymore. In fact, they had a term for all those assets in 2008. They called them toxic assets. So no one knows what they're worth. It's just this thing. No one knows. So banks don't loan. If banks don't loan, what happens to business activity? Every day, businesses have to borrow billions of dollars to survive. Every day. It's called the paper market. Every day. In the morning, they borrow billions of dollars, and at night, they pay it back. It's a one-day loan with a little bit of interest. It's kind of a remarkable thing that no one ever talks about. And it happened in 1929. It happened in October 2008. It just stopped, froze, boom, nobody loaned money. And that would ripple for an economic depression for 7 years. Kind of shocking how fast that happens. And so here are the amount of loans. This is the crash in 2021. Here's the amount of loans in the Great Depression. Tanked. The whole system is has to run on credit. Needs those wheels greased by credit. Debt is not necessarily good, not necessarily bad. So no value judgment, but it has to have the availability of it. So once you have that, you have this phenomenon called debt deflation. And debt deflation is why these panics get so bad. Now, when I was your age, there actually was money. And when I was your age, there'd be short little depressions because there were no financial panics. Because there weren't any. By regulation and rules, they made sure there'd be no financial panics. And so when there was a recession, it was really short. Boom, boom, boom. Now they're really long. The pandemic one is kind of an aberration, so we're not really looking, even though it caused big trouble, we're not really looking at that one. But the one in 2008 lasted forever. And the reason why is debt deflation. The reason why. So just imagine, overnight you have this massive drop, and this is the amount of money in circulation, and these are prices during the Great Depression, just tanking. So just imagine all of a sudden, you have all these people losing their jobs, all these people borrowing money, expectation of tomorrow will be better, and then all of a sudden, boom, tomorrow might be worse, and I have debts today. Debts today. So with this depressed economy, it will trigger what's called a liquidity trap. It's a great term. Okay, if I say liquid assets, does anybody know what that means? Liquid assets. have money that's ready to spend, you're exactly right. Or assets you can quickly convert to cash. Liquidity is cash, money. Whatever that might mean in that context, but you have money right now. A liquidity trap means people can't get their money. They can't get it. There's no money in circulation for debt. And we had a liquidity trap in 2009, we had a liquidity trap in 2008. There was a little one in 2020 when the pandemic first hit. And so what they did is they just dumped money into the economy. The Federal Reserve just dumped a few $1 trillion into the economy. And so that's part of the reason why that was kind of an aberration. But no one has any money. They have debt, and all of a sudden, oh, I gotta pay back my debt. I have too much debt, I gotta pay it back. Where do you get money from? Because you might have a little bit of money, but most people don't just carry mounds of cash. Okay, my grandpa, who owned this, did I talk about my grandpa? Did I tell you about the one who owned the store, who attacked him for being German? Just about him. Well, he didn't trust banks after all the bank failures in rural Nebraska. So he took all his money and buried all the coins and buried it in big pickle jars in the back of the store. He wasn't going to let the bank have it. Which, okay, I can understand his attitude. The problem is, I guess it was deflation you make money because it just grows in value. But you really should know where the money's buried. He had a heart attack and passed away before I met him, and nobody knew where the jars were. And so there are all these jars buried in the backyard of the shop. Well, the shop is since long gone. I know my uncle went and tried to buy a couple before they sold it. But there's jars of coins, and most of them were silver coins and gold coins, all over the backyard. And so this was about 15 years ago. I was with my mom, and we were driving around Papillion, the little town where the store was. And back when the store was there, the town was maybe 3,000. Now it's like 40,000. The way things are. And then this town had changed, but we found the place where the old store was, and it's gone. And does anybody want to guess what's there now? It's a bank. Yeah, it's a parking lot for a bank. It's where the store was. So somewhere under that parking lot are jars of coins. That might not be the best place to keep coins. That's part of the reason why people will put them in securities like stocks or bonds. So, in a normal situation without a depressed economy, if you need cash now, you sell those assets like a stock or bond and get cash. Make sense? What's everyone else doing in a depressed economy? Yeah.
They're selling.
Yeah, they're selling. They're all selling. And what happens to the price of these assets?
It drops.
They all tumble, and no one can get money. You thought you had money, and you don't have it. Your assets are dropping in value. And that means people are selling everything. They're selling their cars, they're selling their homes, they're selling their goats, they're selling everything. It was a big deal to buy fine European goats. That was a sign of wealth. Okay, I'm making that up. I just wanted to say the word goat. But everyone, therefore, if you can't get money, what do you have to do? You have to go live in a cardboard box in this valley. What the heck is that? I don't want to push it. You can see that's just a download. So everyone's got to cut spending. Now you owe and sell off their assets. Well, here's the deal. If everybody cuts spending at the same time, what happens? That might be a smart thing to do. If you have too much debt, you went out and bought those goats, and you realize I spent too much money. That might be a smart move to cut spending to pay off your debt. That's a sound, rational move. But what if everyone does it at the same time? And this is one of the things about when you're planning economic policy. It's difficult to do it, but you can't think in terms of an individual. It's got to be macro for everybody. If everybody cuts spending at once, wow. If everybody sells off their assets at once, wow. In fact, that became the joke. Everything's for sale. Everything is for sale. And so they all try to pay back their debt at the same time. And it turned into chaos. Asset prices tumbled. and depress the economy even further, aka less demand. And then if asset prices tumble, there's less demand, the economy gets worse. What do people do? Well, we better cut more spending. We better sell off more assets. We better pay off our debt. Oh, the asset prices will tumble. And so on, and so on, and so on. Debt deflation is really a crisis. Because how do you get out of it? And ironically, individual debts might go down for some people, but national debt, the national private debt will actually go up when everybody tries to pay back their debt at the same time. It makes it worse. It's a crisis. Because even if you have money, if you see this going on around you, the odds are you're going to hold on to it. You're going to be very reluctant to spend. Even if you have money, even if you're safe. Let's sit on this and wait to see what happens. And what are happening to prices? Tumbling. So if you want to buy a car, would you buy it today? If prices are dropping, would you buy it today? Heck, tomorrow will be lower. Inflation encourages people to buy today. I better buy today, prices will go up tomorrow. Deflation encourages people to wait till tomorrow. Prices are dropping, let's wait and see where it goes. Thus, making the situation worse. Yeah, this is a bad one. How do you get out of it? You need someone to buy stuff. You need somebody to buy stuff. To get production going, you need somebody to buy stuff. And so therefore it's really hard. And there we get to the problem of government. Government has all these tools. They set up the market, they create the currency, they make the laws, they set up the market. They decide if there'll be monopolies or no monopolies. Government makes the rules. Now we can all disagree on what type of rules, but they have this power. And Hoover really tried to do it by persuasion. Don't speculate. Go back to regular sound business. They always said Main Street during that era. But the reason people are speculating is to make a lot of money fast. And during a boom, I'm not going to listen to that. We're going to keep making money fast. So a couple of things are going to happen. First off, government had all these tools to regulate, and they didn't regulate. I told you this job before. I'll leave it right here. Anybody wants it? Didn't regulate the stock market, the banks. We talked about that already. Another big deal was there was no safety net. Now, we talked a little bit about safety net because trickle-down economics is opposed to things like unemployment insurance, Social Security, aid for healthcare, food stamps, things like that. Trickle-down economics opposed. Now, you can talk about whether or not you think that's good policy, but if there's no safety net and there's all of a sudden mass layoffs, that kills demand. If there's mass layoffs and there's unemployment insurance, okay, unemployment insurance will only cover a tiny bit of your paycheck, but at least workers who are laid off will have a little bit of money to keep spending. And therefore, not totally destroy demand in the short run. If there's no safety net, if you have mass unemployed, they go from spending money to destitution overnight, and therefore kill demand. We don't have much of a safety net now. That was definitely one thing they did during the pandemic. Probably the biggest safety net we've ever had. Stimulus checks directly to people, enhanced unemployment insurance. Up until now, for example, if you want the vaccines were free, that's done. And that's Congress passes a law to continue that. But all that happened. And so that's part of the reason why the pandemic, at least demand didn't tank like they thought it was going to. Next, the Federal Reserve did the opposite of what it should do. Now, the Federal Reserve is only 15 years old. And the tools to control the money supply that the Federal Reserve had are brand new. But the Federal Reserves were really thinking about, like, how do we help bankers? And not necessarily the best way to help bankers. This has always been an issue with the Federal Reserve. it's kind of favorable to the big banks. It's the nature of the beast. But they should have raised interest rates in 28 and 29. That would slow down the bubble. Instead, they kept it low because banks were making money, but also so many banks went under because of the farm crisis. They thought this would encourage banks or encourage strength of the bankers. And then at the end of 29, when the crash began, they should have dropped interest rates as quickly as possible. Instead, they kept them the same for months at a time where they desperately needed people to know they have the backstop of credit. That didn't happen. And then, if you have overproduction, what is one way to deal with overproduction? You're making too many goods in your country for consumers in this country to buy. What do? You have to try to export. Well, it was kind of laws out there, ideology, that we got to protect businesses. Well, if businesses aren't making money, we got to get rid of competition and get rid of foreign competition so they buy American stuff. So instead of encouraging exports, Congress passed a massive increase in the tariff. A huge increase in the tariff called the Holly Smoot tariff. Felt good to hit my podium. It's been so long. The Holly Smoot tariff, a massive increase in the tariff. Well, just at a time where people were losing their jobs, this artificially raised some prices, but also, what did it trigger? A trade war. What did other countries around the world do? The same thing. So Britain raised their tariff, France raised their tariff, Japan raised their tariff. In fact, convinced Japan if the United States is going to raise tariffs, maybe we are going to have to find our own raw materials and make sure we control our raw materials and trade elsewhere. And this would help trigger this trade war. The military takeover of Japan, ironically, and their invasion of Manchuria, which would lead to the invasion of Japan and that big imperial war in the Pacific, World War II in the Pacific. So this trade war, it stifled trade when people needed to trade more than ever before. And this would all trigger one more government policy called austerity. Austerity is a cut in government spending. And what is the logic behind it? It's this. Tax revenues go down if there's a panic. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Less people have jobs, companies aren't making as much money, tax revenues will drop. And that means the deficit will go up. Now, the deficit and the debt are very similar, but they're slightly different. The deficit for a government is the difference between tax revenues and spending. That difference is the deficit. So every year, that difference. If revenues are greater than spending, it's a surplus. And for example, most states have, like Montana has by state law, we have to have, there could be no deficit for Montana state government. But federal government's different. They print more money, they have different rules. There's a deficit. The accumulated deficits, that's debt. That's national debt. So everyone got the difference? Deficit is 1 year, debt's accumulated. And debt and deficits go up and down. In good times, tax revenues go up. So it radically changes that. Bad times, tax revenues go down. But you can imagine what's going to happen. In bad times, there might be a push for more government spending. There are more people unemployed. There are people literally starving on the streets. But what happened? Our cry went, we've got to save money. We got to be responsible in bad times. Here's the 1931 cartoon, the American taxpayer telling Congress to save. This is 1931, and yet they want to spend. And so, even though 30 and 31, the Hoover administration asked for increased government spending for things like jobs programs, 32, a big decrease in spending. Why? We have to balance the budget. And there was a lot of talk of this, they said this all the time. We all gotta make sacrifices. The government and the people, we gotta tighten our belt, save money in bad times to get through this together. And maybe as an individual, that might work, but as an entire country, if nobody is spending money by debt deflation, and then government quits spending money. So government goes from buying programs or hiring workers to all of a sudden pulling that money out. What does that do? That killed demand even more. Demand dropped. If there's debt deflation, the government can step in and buy stuff. Here, it did the exact opposite. Same thing happened in 2010. Every state governments, federal government dramatically cut spending, and you saw the same exact thing happen, and depression kind of went on. Consumer demand began to tank, and that lengthened the depression. Once again, if someone's, they talk about, we must all sacrifice together, there's a lot of, belt tightening. We gotta sacrifice. Belt tightening means you're not eating as much. As an individual, sure, but as a national economy, it does have implications. And so this is a joke talking about it, and that's supposed to represent government. Here's a depression and people are starving. And instead of helping them, he's throwing a book that says how to swim. I think that's a pretty clever cartoon. And austerity has implications. 32, the winter of 32-33 was a bad year, the worst. And every other country did this. Germany did massive austerity. Massive austerity in 32. Cut back spending, and the suffering was horrible in Berlin and other places. People started to say, we need something different. And that is going to lead to a loss in confidence in the whole system. If the government, well, first off, people begin to lose faith. I told you about in boom or bust time, there's always a sense of doom. But people began to lose faith first in themselves and oneself. People began to lose faith in them. There's always this idea in the United States that it's individual, we make it on our own. We, if we're a success, it's because our hard work, and if we fail, it's our own fault. Well, here you have all these hardworking people who lost their job because of the Depression. Are they failures? A lot of people thought that. We don't have exact numbers because then you keep track of it. But the number of people who, how families broke up because of this, it's incalculable. Especially so many husbands left their wives and families because they felt like such a failure they couldn't feed their family. This absolute disaster was going on. So many single-parent households during the Great Depression, they just became accountable. They didn't have a way to keep track of it. People thought they were absolute failures and did all sorts of drastic, terrifying action. Well, then look around, wait a minute, we can't all be failures. And that's when we begin to lose faith in the government. And that's where you get shanty towns, what we call Hooverville. And you see this every time in bad economic times. Who do they blame? Whoever the party in power. And it's no coincidence that 32 will be a massive Democratic sweep. And you see that time after time. In 2010, for example, in your lifetime, 2008, when the recession, or the Great Recession began, under a Republican president, you have Obama, and Democrats came sweeping in. Austerity and other things happened in 2010. The recession was still going on. The Republicans did really well in 2010 midterm elections. So they begin to lose faith in government. And then the biggie, they begin to lose faith in the system. Maybe this whole economic system is failing us. And that's where you start seeing people saying, we got to get rid of this. It's not working. More and more people saying that form our kind of quasi-democracy. Remember, a lot of people still can't vote, but more democratic system. It's not working. The capitalist system's not working. Maybe we need more monopolies. Maybe we need less monopolies. Maybe we need socialism. Maybe we need other things. they begin to lose faith. And more extremes begin to take power. You really see it once again. We got to go to Germany. By 1932, the two largest political parties in Germany were a party that was unheard of, a tiny, minuscule party that no one cared about. It was a joke until the Depression hit, which is a local party in Munich, the National Socialists, the Fascist Party. Fascism, authoritarian government, and their mortal enemies would be the other party, the socialists and the communists. That was the divide in Germany. We got to change the system. A lot of wealthy people in the United States say, you know what we need? We need fascism. And they begin to idolize Mussolini. And many of the wealthiest people in the United States, including like the DuPont family, tried to overthrow President Roosevelt and replace it with a fascist dictator in 1932. 1933. Almost happened. One of those, wow, can you imagine? And it's no coincidence that the wealthiest Germany, they, fearful of communism, turned to Hitler, turned to Nazi, the National Socialism, and had him form a government. That was loss of faith. And so that's what was going on. And so in 1932, it looked like it could be over, and people were seriously talking about a new government. And that leads us to the very appropriately named Road to Rock Bottom. And it focuses on farms. But just imagine the same kind of thing in industrial workers. And that's why Java 4 does Ford. This one does farms. I like them both. Last year in class, we watched the Java 4. So this year, I want to watch this one. They both work very well and finishes with the bonus arc. So let us begin. Maybe. Uh-oh. That's water. Is there any question?